Over the last month or so, I have been hearing one question much more often than I ever heard it before, and more often than any other question. And that is it okay to write my memoir as fiction? Now, there are a lot of things that go into figuring out whether this is going to be the right move for you, your story, and your book. And today I want to go through 3 questions that you need to ask yourself to make sure this is going to be a good choice. Stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this. If you're writing a memoir, but you're not sure where to start, and let's face it, you're not really sure where you're going after you do get started, then you are not alone. Not having a plan for your memoir is one of the most common reasons I see that people fall off of these projects that they care about so deeply. And that's why my team created the Memoir Method Checklist. This absolutely free download is going to take you through every single step along with the timeline, all the way from your seed of an idea all the way through holding that beautiful book in your hands. And you can download it at pageandpodium.com/checklist. Happy writing. So sometimes new ideas just catch hold in the ether, and I will start to hear all of these questions kind of come up. Often they're the same question, worded a little bit differently. But in this case, people are asking me almost the exact same question. And what they're asking is whether they should take their life story and instead of writing a memoir, should they write a novel, a fiction novel, that is inspired by their story. Now, when I hear this question, I almost always respond with a follow-up question, which I realize can be so frustrating. All the folks in Memoir Method, you can attest to this. But it is really, really important not just to answer that question, which could be yes, could be no, but to figure out what the reason is that you're asking it. Because depending on why you're thinking about doing this, it's going to be a different set of answers, a different set of responses. I'm going to give you different advice. All right, so today I want to talk about the top 3 underlying questions that are causing people to ask whether or not they should fictionalize their memoir. And the first question that I want to ask you as a follow-up is, do you think that it will be easier to publish your book as a novel, as fiction, than it is to publish it as a memoir? Because if that's what's driving your question, we need to dig way into how the book industry works, and particularly into book markets. Okay, so I think that one of the things that happens is that there's such a larger platform for people just in pop culture to talk about fiction. So if you're, for example, if you're on TikTok, you see book talk, right? You see people plugging their books all the time. I personally love these videos. I will screen capture every book that looks good and then just work my way through them. It is dreamy. So that kind of thing, and then you might see, there'll be roundup lists a lot of times, and a lot of times those are focused on fiction. If you yourself are a fiction reader, then you are much more naturally going to encounter more fiction than you are encountering memoir. And I think a lot of times, just the biggest thing is that memoir readers are a pretty specific group of people. Now, what we do is we will always try, when we work with you, to angle your book in a way that will also appeal to fiction readers while keeping it a memoir. So that is an option. But what I think really is happening here is that folks are seeing all of this talk about fiction, and they're imagining, correctly by the way, that there are more agents and publishers who are focused on fiction than there are focused on memoir. That's true. There are way more agents that do some genre of fiction than there are agents who do memoir. Now, notice that I said some genre of fiction, because your memoir isn't going to fit in any single genre, right? Memoir and fiction are not comparable categories. The comparable categories, of course, would be nonfiction and fiction. So when you're jumping over, you really need to think more about what genre of fiction you're going to be in. Because here's the thing. I know it can feel like memoir is really crowded. There aren't that many agents. There aren't that many people reading it. That can feel really, really scary. But once you get to the very specific type of fiction you're trying to write, you're going to see the same thing there, right? So one thing I want to encourage you to think about as you're moving through this is if you are thinking, well, it's going to be so much easier, to get this fiction deal. I want you to think about how willing you are to make a lot of revisions to the story. And that brings me to the second question that you need to be asking yourself. How willing are you going to be to make revisions to, say, appease an editor or an agent? And by editor, I mean an editor at a publishing house, not, somebody you would just hire. An editor or an agent. How willing are you going to be to change up that vision for the story that you had to appease readers in that particular subgenre? Are you going to be willing to do, many, many different rounds of revisions on the whole manuscript to, tweak the story, change the climax, cut characters, cut out scenes? Because here is the thing. If you are writing a memoir as fiction, you are going to lose all of the stuff that allows you to keep stuff in your memoir. And what I mean by that is you have got, this person that really guided you through, life, and they did so much for you. But nothing really dramatic happened in their life. As is often the case in fiction, the guide will often die or leave the side of the hero. If that didn't happen, then this person's storyline can sometimes kind of feel just like it fizzles. Are you going to be cool to cut that person out of your book? Because that may be what it takes to get your book published if it's fiction. Now, in memoir, you may get suggestions to tweak the characters. You may even get a suggestion to cut it. But you're going to be getting feedback from people who know that this is your real story. When you're working in fiction, it is not going to matter that it's your real story. You are pitching as fiction, so the thing that is important is the story and the writing. So think about, as you're kind of thinking about this publishing path, could it be a little bit easier to get an agent's attention with fiction? It really depends on the fiction. That is not certainly a comparison I would make directly between memoir specifically and fiction generally. But the bigger question is, if there is interest from an agent or if there is interest from an editor at a publishing house, how willing are you going to be to reshape that narrative, even though it's based on your life? Because once you hop into that fiction world, you can still, defend your work and make arguments for why it shouldn't change, but you're not going to be able to argue, well, I can't change it because that's how it happened. You fictionalized, so you kind of lose that argument for yourself. So if you are, totally certain, you really just always wanted to write a novel and, there's kind of a couple little incidents in your life or, maybe a person that you think is really interesting in your life, and you think like, well, okay, I'll take these little seeds, I'll make it into a novel. That is probably going to be fine. If what you're thinking is, I really want to write a memoir, just the ending isn't going to be as exciting as I think it should be, so I'm just going to change the ending or something similar, right? It's a memoir, it's just kind of one little slice of fiction. Keep in mind that you are kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You are throwing out the genre of telling a story from your life in order to be in this fiction camp. It is all or nothing, right? You are not going to be able to access the arguments and the perspectives of memoir if you hop over into fiction, the same way that fiction authors are not going to be able to leverage that kind of authentic, genuine storytelling of having lived this story. Now, here is another piece of this big puzzle that I want to bring up that's really highly related to these previous two I talked about, and that is, are you an amazing writer? Now, if you're trying to get a traditional book deal, you are going to have really strong writing no matter what. But here's the thing. I have seen first-time memoir authors, people who really, they just wanted to write basically one book and get it out there. I have seen authors be successful with that. Almost every fiction writer I know has 5 or 6 or 7 novels. They're called trunk novels, meaning that after they were written, they were sometimes shopped around, but then they got put in a trunk for later. That is very, very common because in fiction, it is not about the story, right? You have thrown out that life story component. You've thrown out the component of, you being able to be the face of this book. And instead, where you're headed into is a writing competition. Because in fiction, it is if you can grip the reader, if you are able to manage the nuances and tweaks of story structure to fit with what the reader expects while adding something really interesting and new. And this is truly a craft. This is truly something that fiction writers work on their whole entire lives and sometimes never get a break. So I say that to dispel this idea that it's going to be easier to get a book deal. Now, as I said earlier, and if your story is really, really interesting, you may be able to get the attention of an agent or a publisher, and it may be easier in the category of novel or in fiction. The problem is you also have to follow through with that. Interest is not enough, right? Interest is going to get them to read your manuscript. Interest will not get you through the gate. So what you need to really do is make sure that you are practicing and honing that craft of fiction. Whereas with memoir, we are still working with the craft, of course we are, but your story structure, we're going to tweak it, we're going to move it, we're going to make sure that the arc is really, really interesting, but you're not starting from scratch. You know what happened. It's just pulling the right threads through. I don't believe that one is easier than the other, but that's kind of my point, right? Memoir isn't easier, but fiction isn't really easier either. So you're kind of just picking what is the thing that you want to practice and hone and get really, really good at. Because if it's writing fiction, go that direction. If it's telling your story in a powerful way, memoir all the way. It's not even a question, not even a thought. And that brings me to my next point. Are you thinking that you'll write a novel instead of memoir because you think it'll be easier to make your story have a really interesting arc? So this comes up sometimes if people are like, well, but like, my story hasn't ended. I'm still kind of living it. They are thinking, in this case, that they're going to take the story that actually happened to them, but then as they round out to that climax, they'll kind of split paths with the truth and find a more interesting, very exciting climax. Well, here's the thing. Is the rest of your book going to hold up that climax? Because as I said earlier, in fiction, it's all the overall structure. And once you've hopped from memoir to fiction, you have now lost all of the arguments that you would have about kind of, well, this is real, this is how it happened. I really, in integrity, I need to stay in the world of truth, because you're not in the world of truth. You're literally in the world of fiction, right? Now, if what you're thinking is, I had this one thing that happened to me, and it gives me, when I think about it, it gives me all of these ideas for, someone should write a fiction book, a novel about this. Now, if that is the case for you, if you are feeling like it's honestly, it's just the one thing that happened that kind of started the journey, everything worked out, but this journey started here, I just want to start with that. Go for it. And I want to tell you a personal story about how I have seen this happen. Not in a book, but I think it's interesting. I think it's worth sharing. So I had a few years ago, I went kind of accidentally viral on Twitter. There was a post that I saw that said, share the thing that in your life that people would say you made it up, but it really did happen. I'm paraphrasing there, but it was something like that. So in college, I had fallen out of my bunk bed and I broke both my legs and my arm. Oof. I think I probably had a vitamin D deficiency. We're okay now. But as the story played out, as it happened in my life, I ended up on a date with a guy who happened to be the brother of the EMT who had helped me. And the funny thing that happened was that on the date, we were kind of talking about being clumsy, which I'm very clumsy. And I said, well, I'm the clumsiest person ever. And he said, well, you listen to this girl that fell off her bunk bed that my EMT brother worked with. It was me. I did, of course, say, well, that's me. Actually, I told you I'm the clumsiest person around. So that is how that story wrapped. Now, when that tweet went viral, I got so many messages, including from TV producers. I did an interview with a TV producer, including all kinds of media folks who are wanting to talk to me. You know what they all said? They all said, well, did you marry the guy? Friends, no, I did not. I think we went on a few dates, but it was not a love connection. We did not get married. I don't know this for a fact, but I really highly suspect that if we had gotten married and lived happily ever after, I think that there might have been someone that would have come along and written, a movie or something about it. And that is not just my vanity. The reason that I believe that to be true is that just this year, I was contacted by a podcaster, a fiction podcaster, and what she and her partner do is that they write short stories, and it's such a cool podcast. They write short stories and then they read them so that if you're having trouble falling asleep, you can listen to their very soothing voices, and they will tell you a story. So they fictionalized my story. It's really good. It's very, very sweet. And I will drop the link into the show notes so that you can listen to it if you'd like. But it is highly fictionalized. In fact, really the only thing that they worked from as far as source material goes was just that one tweet that I posted. If that is what you are thinking for your book, that it is just, one little tiny sliver, one incident, one date, one accident where you got hurt because you're very awkward. One little thing. Fiction might be the way to go if the other things that I've said are true for you too. You want to really work on your craft. You're willing to revise all of that. There can be a world where that makes sense. So just think about kind of in context, is that going to be okay with you? Now, I think if you have been watching my show for very long, you know where I'm going with my very last and I think most important question. And that is the reason that you want to fictionalize your memoir that you're trying to hide? For a while, the question that I always would get was, can I use a pseudonym or a pen name? Can I use a different name? Or sometimes people would say, can I publish anonymously? Now, can you? Yes. Will you be able to get a book deal if you are anonymous, if you are trying to write nonfiction under a pen name? That is much, much more questionable. And in fact, some experts will tell you the answer is absolutely not. I believe there probably is some wiggle room, but you're probably not going to get, a Simon & Schuster deal if you want to be anonymous, if you want to make sure no one ever knows who you are. And the reason is, nonfiction is always sold on the credibility of the author. Now, so many people who come to me say, but I don't have any credibility. You don't have credibility because you haven't written the book yet. We're going to build both of those up, right? You do not have to be a celebrity to publish a memoir. But what you do need to be willing to do is get out there, use your face, use your speaking talents or build speaking talents, or use guest posting talents. You do need to be willing to get out there and build relationships and connections with your reader. If you are anonymous, if you're using a pen name, a lot of times that's really hard for people, especially if the reason you're using a pen name is that you don't ever want anybody to know who you are. So the same advice goes here. Are you trying to fictionalize because you are afraid of people knowing, that this story happened to you, that you are afraid that maybe somebody that you that was in your life might come for you or might be really angry or might try to sue you? So the advice I want to give is the same advice that I give when people ask if they can use a pen name or anonymize. Just know it will not protect you from blowback, and it will not protect you from lawsuits. Even if you fictionalize your book, if people recognize themselves in it, and even if you put at the beginning, what's always on the crime procedurals, this is not based on any real or whatever, however that's worded, on any real people, purely coincidental. Unfortunately, there is still a possibility that if you mention someone and reveal private details about your interactions with them, things that they would have reasonably been able to expect would have been private, they can still sue you. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. That I can't speak to. But don't think that because you call it fiction, you are totally off the hook from any kind of family or friendship or legal consequences. Okay, now I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving legal advice, but I do think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind. Okay, so as you are thinking through this, I want to leave you with just one more thought, just one observation that I thought of the last time somebody asked me this question. And that is, I have been hearing a lot about this idea of fictionalizing your memoir. I've been hearing a lot about that from authors. You know who I have not heard any of that talk from? Publishers or agents. Sometimes these things hit the interwebs and they get legs and they get going and it can seem like such a good idea. I am not convinced, my friends, and I always want to be honest with you. You know that. My number one value is that I will always be honest and I will always be clear. And I am not so sure that publishers and agents are interested in reading novels that have some kind of undisclosed, vague foundation of truth. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but I can tell you that is not it's not something that's on people's manuscript wish lists. It's not on something, that I'm hearing from agents like, oh, do you have anybody that's writing da-da-da-da-da? Truly, this kind of crossover between fiction and nonfiction can actually make it really difficult in the industry, because even though readers will cross those different genres and different categories, agents and publishers really don't. Editors work in their specialty, agents work in their specialty. If they are a fiction specialty, they are not probably working with memoir, at least not much. If they are memoir specialty, they're probably not working with much fiction. So, no hard and fast rules. I have no doubt that this has been successful for people in the past. Of course it has, and it could be successful for you. So if you feel in your gut that the right choice is to take your book from memoir to novel, do not let me stop you. Go after it with all of the courage and all of the excitement and all of the enthusiasm that you have in you. But if you're trying to hide, if you're trying to make things easier on yourself, if you are not going to be willing to let go of some of the important characters and scenes in your life, I would really encourage you, slow down, think about it, and if it would be helpful, let's book a consult, see if we can help you through this whole entire system from the idea to publishing. And oftentimes when you have that kind of support, there's really no need to fictionalize. You can get just as engaging a book as you would if you could make it all up from scratch. Okay, be sure that you like and subscribe. If you think this video would be helpful, please share it with someone else. And stay tuned, I've got a free resource I want to let you know about in the next clip. Happy writing. If you are using the beautiful momentum of spring to restart your memoir, but you're not sure how to get started, or you're worried you're going to fall off track the same way you maybe have years before, well, I've got a resource for you. It's called the Memoir Method Checklist. And my team developed this based on the systems and strategies we have used for years to write dozens of memoirs and help dozens more authors write their own. It's going to take you through all of the steps from your very first seed of an idea all the way to getting that memoir out, whether you want to self-publish, traditionally publish, or find a hybrid press like Page and Podium. You can download this resource absolutely free at pageandpodium.com/checklist. And once you do, let me know what you find helpful. I would love to hear about you and your book and your writing journey. Happy writing.